This is Bloomberg Businessweek Daily, reporting from the magazine that helps global leaders stay ahead, with insight on the people, companies, and trends shaping today's complex economy, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Businessweek Daily with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec, live on Bloomberg Radio, television, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals.
A very good afternoon, everybody. Tim and I back here on the East Coast. This is Bloomberg Businessweek Daily for this 9/11, the 24th anniversary of 9/11. So there is a lot on our mind on this Thursday. Having said that, we're thinking about that. We're also thinking about what's going on in the markets because, Tim, we've got stocks and bonds both higher today.
Yeah, relatively tame reading on inflation, signs of a cooling job market, investors speculating the Fed are going to cut interest rates for the first time this year. That's the expectation. We'll hear from Jay Powell and co. next Wednesday.
We're going to talk a lot about the economy over the next 60 minutes. We do also want to point out something that's definitely sparked our interest at this hour. Paramount Skydance, the Hollywood studio taken over in August by independent filmmaker David Ellison, is preparing a bid for rival Warner Brothers Discovery. This is according to a person with knowledge of the matter. So we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on when it comes to the world of media, and a story coming from our Lucas Shaw out there on the West Coast. We should point out the Wall Street Journal first putting out a story on that. And then we are going to talk, Tim, a lot about the economy. Yeah,
we'll hear from Citi CEO Jane Fraser weigh in with a Bloomberg exclusive. Also, we're going to hear from Matthew Luzzetti, chief U.S. economist and head of U.S. economic research over at Deutsche Bank. He's going to be joining us in just a few minutes.
And we're talking national security, geopolitics, U.S. economic policy, so much with Democratic Congressman Gabe. So a lot to get to. First up, though, let's get to the trading day on this Thursday. Here is Charlie Kirk.
Hi, thank you very much, Carol. Tim, welcome back. Indeed, we are trading at records right now. Got to begin with this developing story. Paramount Skydance, that of course the Hollywood studio being taken over by independent filmmaker David Ellison, preparing a bid for rival Warner Brothers Discovery. This according to a person who is familiar with the matter. Right now we do have shares of both companies are moving higher. Paramount Skydance up 7.3%. Warner Brothers Discovery, though, just about the high of the session right now, up 31.7%. All of this a developing story. Now, the Wall Street Journal reported earlier that the mostly cash offer will be for the entire company. Paramount declined to comment. Our Lucas Shaw writes that Warner did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Again, developing story, major transaction in the works, said to be in the works. And again, Paramount Skydance up now by 7.7%. Warner Brothers Discovery, it is surging now by 32%. Stay with Bloomberg for the latest on this developing story. All of this with U.S. stocks trading at a record, with the S&P up another 54, 65.86. Where we stand right now, that is a gain of 0.8%. We do have the Dow Industrials up 1.4%. NASDAQ Composite Index up by 0.7%. The Russell 2000 Index of small cap shares, it is surging now by 1.7%. After this morning's economic data, consumer prices, jobless claims, we've got the 10-year 4.01%, with the 2-year 3.53%. Gold down 0.1%, 36.35 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude down 2%, 62.43 a barrel. So again, we got merger speculation here. Paramount Skydance up 7.2%. Warner Brothers Discovery up now by 34%. Stay with Bloomberg for the latest on this developing story. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. We do want to get an update on the murdering of conservative activist Charlie Kirk. Federal investigators have recovered what they believe is the rifle used to kill him during that campus event in Utah. This is according to FBI officials, Tim, as the manhunt for the shooter entered its second day.
The FBI treating the case as an attack on free speech, with the special agent in charge saying, quote, any attack on the First Amendment is an attack on the very foundation of our democracy. Here with the latest is a Bloomberg News senior reporter who covers Homeland Security and the FBI, Myles Miller. He joins us here in the studio. Myles, as Carol mentioned, investigators have recovered what they believe is the rifle used to kill Charlie Kirk. They've also released several images of somebody they say is connected to this. What is the latest?
That's right. A young gentleman with a American flag T-shirt seen leaving in the minutes after Charlie Kirk was shot. So the type of gun, very important here, high-powered Mauser bolt action rifle, and you see, just to be 200 yards away and to fire with that kind of accuracy is another one of those clues in this that the investigator is going to look in to figure out who this person is. Was he trained? What was the motive behind this? This is all part of what they're trying to figure out this afternoon.
There's still, I guess, so much to be known. We've talked about this certainly in our planning call to be very careful about how we characterize this because there are so many unknowns. Is it safe to assume he was acting on his own, or do we still not know that even yet?
Yeah, that's unclear too. You have an incident here where you have a large public event, 3,000 people on a college campus, where you have 6 police officers protecting this event of so many people, and then you've got a suspect who is relatively unknown in any way. No one saw him get on top of the roof, and no one saw him leave. But what they're working on right now are footwear impressions, palm prints, seeing if they can get a latent print from a cartridge. But that has to be linked to, fingerprints in a system, right? Like I worked for the city, so my fingerprints are in the system. That doesn't happen for everybody. So it just makes it that much more difficult to figure out who this person is.
The technology available today, the fact that there were people who were taking photos and videos of the event separate from this, obviously, and separate from what we've seen circulate online in the last 22 hours or so. What technology are law enforcement officials able to use from civilians, from people who were there, and also closed circuit television? This is a college campus. These places are very heavily monitored.
Yeah, one thing that's going to be crucial in this is facial recognition, right? They'll be able to put that image into, say, a Clearview AI and figure out, does this match any of the people on social media, any people seen in any public setting? Another thing that they'll do is they'll track the surveillance video from point A to point B. So they'll see him getting up onto that roof. They track him through the woods. What about ring cameras? Did anybody see anything on the ring? Did he drive there? I mean, Utah is very spaced out, so he'll have to have driven there likely, or was he dropped off? Did he use a credit card? At a gas station. These are all the things that investigators have to do in a case when it's not as clear cut. And this is about not as clear cut as it gets. One that's definitely going to be puzzling for an FBI office that's not as big as, say, the Denver, Colorado office, or here in New York, one of the smaller offices that just had its special agent in charge swapped out by the current FBI director. And so there's a lot of upheaval happening in Salt Lake City, and you've got this massive case. Again, 6 officers protecting 3,000 people.
What's been the impact on college campuses around the nation? I heard Joe Matthew earlier talking about some security concerns at some universities.
Yeah, I think, HBCUs, so historically black colleges and universities in this country, have gotten some threats, and, those have been investigated, but so far nothing there. There was word of a scare at a university here in New York City, but that's been unconfirmed. So, it remains to be seen how you keep, you have to figure out how you're going to keep a campus full of students safe. But again, this is about much more than that. This is about political violence rearing its head again. We saw it in Minnesota months ago. We saw it in Pennsylvania, and now again happening in Utah, in a place where 3,000 people came to see Charlie Kirk, and if they didn't agree with him, they at least wanted to hear him debate.
Yeah, not to mention the attack on President Trump's life last year in Butler, Pennsylvania. Myles, before we let you go, thinking about this from the perspective not just of security, but also from Kash Patel and the FBI and what we've heard from the FBI over the last day or so. Yesterday, we did hear something about subjects being questioned in custody. Nothing came of that. That's done.
Right. One gentleman who was taken into custody, his family said he was a big supporter of Charlie Kirk, would never be involved in that. Another person was a local rabble-rouser who wasn't involved either. But this does point at, I think, a point that you're getting at, which was the FBI director being eager to tweet, and then those tweets both, not bearing out being the person responsible. It's something that we haven't seen in the past, but this is a more vocal FBI director. All of President Trump's agency heads are very vocal on social media. That rush definitely hinders the investigation, because then investigators are like, whoa, we have this one, oh, it's not that person, now we've got to move back on. And then you've got social media identifying people incorrectly and then having their families doxxed and all of that. So that plays a big role in this as well.
Which is a reminder, if you think about all other moments of either terrorism or domestic uncertainty that involves shootings, that investigators and officials have often said, let's wait until we have all the information, be very careful about putting any information out there until it is really confirmed. Myles Miller, thank you so much. Myles is, of course, senior reporter covering Homeland Security and the FBI here at Bloomberg News, joining us in studio. All right, we are keeping a watch on that. And then there's several stories that are going on today that are certainly impacting the markets. At this moment, we are seeing news of Paramount Skydance getting ready to make a bid for rival Warner Brothers Discovery, according to a person with knowledge of the matter. This story initially reported out by the Wall Street Journal, now matched by our own Lucas Shaw. We see shares of Paramount Skydance up about 9% in today's trade, and Warner Brothers Discovery as the target. No surprise, you're looking at this one, Tim, up more than 30%.
And Caroline Hyde is the co-host of Bloomberg Technology on Bloomberg TV. She joins us here in the Bloomberg Businessweek studio. Caroline, initially, we did see shares of Paramount Skydance lower on this, and then they ended up moving higher. Not typical that we'd see both companies higher with news like this, but I guess, hey, people aren't concerned about the cash source of David Ellison.
So right, because it looks as though the cash source would be family Ellison.
Okay.
And who was at one point the most wealthy person in the world yesterday, and then settled just $1 billion below Elon Musk, but Larry Ellison. And that was on the enormous move we saw in Oracle. Now you see a similar plus 30% move on Warner Brothers Discovery, which would be the target in this particular area. It's a record move for the stock. But I think so many people feel that fundamentally this is what we need to see in the industry, consolidation. You're seeing David Zaslav over at Warner Brothers Discovery unwinding the deal he did several years ago.
Right.
Because ultimately you've got cable on one side and then you have studios and streaming on the other. You want to split those apart. And likelihood is Paramount would be interested in the studios and that area.
Well, to that point, we should note Netflix shares hitting a session low, down more than 4% after this report came out. So this is all about...
It all starts to get interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it's all about, though. It's all about Netflix. It's all about streaming.
And it's all about M&A. And I think you'll speak to so many analysts on the street who've just been waiting for this sort of thing to happen. But you did need certain areas to come into force. You needed, of course, Comcast to be starting to split itself in two. You needed Warner Brothers Discovery to be talking about splitting itself in two. The interesting deal is, why is Paramount trying to buy both bits? Most people feel that the value for Paramount as a key studio maker, as a key streaming focus, would be, of course, the areas of growth, the Harry Potter and the DC Comics and the studio side of Warner Brothers Discovery. Why do they want CNN? Why do they want some of the more struggling cable parts of the business? Or maybe they feel that they could get more than some of their parts if they then sold those off in more interesting M&A.
Right, like just buy it all, right, and then figure out like the parts that they don't want. Any chance somebody else comes in? Could there be another interested party? I mean, as we've heard, like the expectations around consolidation in this industry.
Exactly. And look, you talk to some of the new leadership that have been thinking about, when you see Versant that's been splitting off, for example, from the other key areas of Comcast, they've been saying, look, we're not going to be like a dying ember of cable news here and cable sports. We're actually going to be acquisitive. But many feel that they're actually going to be acquisitive more in the area of startups, more in the area of the future of sports growth, the future of news, but perhaps not other cable networks. But they haven't taken their name off the table when it comes to... Remember, there's A&E out there. There's so many of these other companies that could be really interesting targets. And I think Bloomberg Intelligence are basically already saying, look, from a Warner Brothers Discovery perspective, you're looking at maybe $17 would be the right sort of price for the whole business as a whole, and you're seeing it move up to that as we speak.
Yeah.
You know, at the beginning of like our careers, this would be a regulatory issue.
Yeah.
True. The government would get involved and say, we don't want this much media consolidation. Is that not even part of a concern for analysts right now, because the ecosystem has been so beat up?
And the competition just isn't from cable network to cable network, but it's from its eyeballs.
Yeah.
The competitor to TV now is YouTube. The competitor to the streaming platforms is TikTok. Everyone is fighting for your and my eyeballs. And what is the future growth story? Is it advertising? Well, advertisers are all going to new different platforms. Is there different ways in which you can charge subscription base, driving for this value of the business? I think this is an entire industry that has been upended, and I think most feel to even allow them to sustain themselves going forward, you've got to allow M&A. Otherwise, they just start to die out.
You cover this world. It just feels like media, technology, everything is just kind of merging. I don't know. What are you watching out for? Like, what might be the next kind of shoe to drop here?
In terms
of this story.
Well, I think of this story, it is going to be interesting as to whether we see these purchases happen in cash only, whether you start to see interesting ways in which are financing certain deals. I think a lot of the storytelling for these new businesses, particularly in the cable areas that we're going to be splitting off, is they're saying we're going to be cash rich, actually. We're going to have the balance sheet to be able to put to work. For me, this is just, look, we are at record highs in the stock market. You are seeing people going all in on the artificial intelligence story, but there is still so much optimism in deal making. And I think it's pretty phenomenal that you're seeing these sorts of cash bids come. I don't know how many more billionaires are out there who can start buying all these bids, but Larry Ellison is clearly something different.
Or how many could say, hey, Dad, I need a little help here. Yeah. I'm just kidding.
So finally, on the streaming side of this for consumers, should we think about this from the context of one option perhaps in the future for Paramount Plus subscribers and HBO Max or whatever it's called now, subscribers? This becomes one thing. It's supercharged, and you can get everything from Warner Brothers Discovery and Paramount Skydance.
I think you're really smart to put it that way, because look how we're seeing Disney trying to interact with its own bundling and the way it's bringing Hulu on a little bit more.
ESPN, Hulu, Disney, $30 a month. I just bought it.
And suddenly it makes more sense. Like, what old is new again? Before we wanted everything to split off, now we want it all once again back in our bundle. And I think that ultimately has to be the way in which they can drive cross-pollination. And you will see people want to be able to just go to a one-stop shop. Look, you're seeing even deals done across the aisle with Amazon being able to offer other rivals. I mean, we will just generally want one go-to button that we can click, and suddenly, voila, we can get all of them.
I think you could do that with a cable subscription. I think you can do that.
Right, exactly.
It's called Revolution, not Evolution, guys.
Exactly. Incredible story. Bloomberg News and Bloomberg Technology co-host Caroline Hyde. Catch her and Ed Ludlow every day at 11 a.m. Wall Street time. Hey, she talked about, Caroline, about more consolidation, certainly when it comes to the media world. We heard Jane Fraser in an exclusive interview. Of course, she's the CEO of Citigroup, talking about clients becoming more active on M&A. She did a wide-ranging conversation with our team in Dubai. She also talked a little bit about the economy, the business environment, and the investment backdrop.
You've got to look at the collective impact of the tax policy, what's been happening with tariffs, and indeed the increasing deregulation that we're seeing. And they work together as a package. I think the most important piece for a corporate, clarity. We hate uncertainty. We like clarity. And our client base now is really starting to act with more confidence now that we've got clarity on those three fronts. So active in the capital market arena in financing, much more active in investing, less sitting on the sidelines. And M&A has been very, very active indeed, as we talked about. Yeah. And on the consumer side, pretty robust spending through the summer. And we saw that really across all categories, helped a bit by lower gas prices. But the consumers being fiscally responsible, being more mindful around some spend, but still the spending levels were very pleasing.
So the momentum was pretty strong across all lines of your business in the second quarter. Of course, I don't want to precipitate the upcoming earnings, but can that momentum continue into the end of the year, just in terms of, what you're seeing in advisory, in deal making, and in trading? Because it was a very strong quarter for trading as well.
It was exceptional for us on all fronts. I still see very strong pipelines. I see high level of engagement from clients. I see a sense of urgency as well, given the speed with which industry structures are changing, and there is still growth opportunity. I think growth will be a notch lower. We're keeping an eye on the labour market. It's a low churn market. So not everything is rosy, but we don't see a recession on the horizon.
All right, that, of course, was Citigroup CEO Jane Fraser, and exclusive with our team, Bloomberg TV team over in Dubai. So she and her team at Citi are keeping an eye on the labor market. Keep in mind, we are too, and we also got an inflation print this morning that we also were awaiting eagerly. That read... Actually, we got the read on inflation. Forgive me, lost my place. But we also got a read on the U.S. jobs market. Applications for U.S. unemployment benefits jumping last week to the highest level in almost 4 years. So there's a lot coming at investors. What I wanted to say is that the U.S. inflation print that we got, that we were eagerly awaiting, as expected in August, They rose, but it was in line with what the street was expecting. So curious to see what our next guest has to say. Matthew Luzzetti is Chief U.S. Economist and Head of U.S. Economic Research at Deutsche Bank, joining us here in studio. Forgive me, there's a lot coming at us.
There's a lot going on.
Do you agree with Jane Fraser that you're not worried about a recession? She doesn't seem to be.
Yeah, I would agree with that. There's a few kind of interesting comments, and as she noted, a robust consumer. In an environment where some of us are worried about the labor market, the robust consumer, strong growth. The Atlanta Fed is actually tracking 3% for GDP growth in Q3. There's a lot of mixed signals on that front. I would watch items like the labor market and the jobless claims data that we see. The loan churn environment that she was talking about in the labor market is absolutely there. And the thing you get worried about is if layoffs begin to pick up, then undermines the consumer, and then we can have recessionary dynamics. I would caution about interpreting this morning's data point as that. There's a weird spike in the Texas jobless claims, which seems to be associated with the floods that you had earlier in July. So I don't think that was actually a real print. I would expect that comes back down.
I have to be honest, I'm really confused about the inflation side of this economic story right now and why we're not seeing tariff price increases pass through on the data. And I can share an anecdote yesterday. Looking at an e-bike battery, for example, went to a shop, an $800 battery that a few months ago was $800 is now $1,100 as a result of tariffs. We're not seeing that 20% increase in the data yet. Why not?
So I think we are actually seeing it. If you were to decompose the consumer price basket between those items that have high import content, those that have low import content, we are seeing a big acceleration in inflation in the high import content items. In past months, we saw household furnishings rise, recreational goods rise. We've now begun to see that in motor vehicle parts,
trucks,
motor vehicle repair. Yeah. Apparel inflation actually rose pretty robustly this month. So it's been a mixed picture. Used cars and trucks, new vehicles have not shown it. In prior months, you had seen some offset from airfares and from services items, but we are seeing it. What has not happened, I think, is the scary large inflation prints that we were all worried about. But inflation's at 3%, and it's been well above the Fed's target for the past 4.5 years. And most of the recent increase is being driven by tariffs.
So you, in your notes that you shared with us, say that there's still scope for the first round of tariffs to have a further impact on inflation in the near term. What kind of impact, Matt?
So I think that comes from our view on PPI data. So earlier this week, yesterday, we got the PPI. And again, that was actually weaker than anticipated when you looked at the headlines and the core. But when you look at the underlying details, there's a lot of pipeline inflation that's coming through with that. And so I would expect that you actually continue to see an acceleration in core goods inflation through the end of this year. Now, for the Fed, and as we look forward to monetary policy next week, a lot of Fed officials have taken the view, look, we're going to look through a lot of this tariff-driven inflation. And as long as it is isolated to items like core goods that we think that it's tariffs, we can still cut rates. And of course, for the Fed, they're a dual mandate central bank. So it's not just the inflation picture. What's happening in the labor market matters a lot there. And so the fact that we got a weak jobs report last Friday, big downward revisions earlier this week, leans them in a dovish direction in the near term.
What I don't understand is, though, if we are in a higher tariff rate environment that's going to exist going forward, why is it we can look forward to it? Because it does mean higher prices, right? And either companies have to eat it or we have to eat it.
So it does, but the theory is that it's
and doesn't that mean inflation ticks higher?
In the near term, yes. But if it's a one-time price increase, it should not be a sustained inflation shock.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
You know, there's a word for that.
Numerically.
There's a word for that.
The word is transitory.
Okay,
I'm not going to use
making sure we're
after going through having a forecast in 2020 and 2021. Okay. I'm trying to avoid the transitory language, but yes.
Yeah.
The idea is that it is a one-time price shock. Now it's going to take a while to play out, and I think from the PPI data we see this is going to last into 2026. And so even if it is one time or quote unquote transitory, it takes a while to play out.
Hey, on the labor market, going back to fundamental shifts that we've seen in the last few months during this administration, and Carol's mention of that weak jobs report, do we need to think about labor completely differently with immigration shut down in this country?
Yes. And absolutely how we think about those monthly jobs prints has changed dramatically over the past 2 years. I think if you go back 2 years ago when we were having the surge in immigration, 200,000 plus was the norm for payroll gains. Now, some of those have been revised down. But in this current environment, given demographics, given immigration flows, 50,000 is probably a perfectly fine number to keep the unemployment rate steady. And so I think we should revamp how we think about things. But the uncertainty around that suggests that we should focus on other things. The unemployment rate matters more than payroll gains matter. Things like the quits rate, job openings unemployed, these measures of labor market slack are the most important indicators for our assessment of the labor market. And although they haven't weakened a lot, they've started to show some early signs of modest weakening.
Just real quickly, they're going to kill me. 20 seconds. What should the Fed do? Should they be cutting rates?
I think they will cut rates by 25 basis points next week.
Do you think it's right?
I think they should, given the change in the risk assessment. Where I disagree with the market pricing is more next year. The market has the Fed continuing to cut rates below 3% next year. We don't see an economy that necessitates that. Now, if you get a different reaction function because there's a turnover in Fed personnel, we might have to revisit that view.
Great stuff. Matt, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Matthew Luzzetti, he is Chief U.S. Economist and Head of U.S. Economic Research at Deutsche Bank, joining us here in studio.
Hey, let's get an update on everything happening in the markets and the business news world. Standing by in our studio, here he is, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much indeed. Right now, we are looking at records for stocks, but do want to bring you up to date on a developing story. Source telling Bloomberg, Paramount Skydance, the Hollywood studio taken over in August by David Ellison, is said to be preparing a bid for rival Warner Brothers Discovery. Right now, we have got Warner Brothers Discovery surging by 26%. Shares of Paramount Skydance, they're up by 7%. This on a day as the S&P 500 index pushes higher after the morning's economic data. S&P at 6583. That is a record, up 0.8%. The Dow right now up 1.3%. NASDAQ up 0.7%. The 10-year 4.01%. And the 2-year 3.53%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Well, we are, as you know, noting the 24th anniversary of 9/11 today. It's a day when we continue to see geopolitical threats and tensions and unease here at home following the shooting and killing of conservative activist Charlie Kirk during that campus event in Utah. And on a global scale, we see tensions between Poland and Russia. And so NATO certainly watching, and we would assume the U.S. is as well. For a perspective, we want to head to the U.S. House of Representatives. Congressman Gabe Amo, Democrat for Rhode Island's 1st Congressional District. He joins us from the Cannon Rotunda in the nation's capital. Congressman Amo, thank you so much for joining us. It is
Thanks for having me.
This 24th anniversary of 9/11. It's a reminder that terrorism on a grand scale can and did happen here in the U.S. We've seen other forms of political violence, numerous shootings of political figures and officials. And of course, we're talking about Charlie Kirk today. Your reaction to the shooting and killing of him?
Well, first and foremost, remember all those lost on 9/11 and the brave first responders and civilians who stepped in. And of course, we have another somber note today as we reflect on the killing of Charlie Kirk. And I start from a place of great sympathy, sympathy for his family, his spouse and children, and I turn to political violence that we have seen in this country in a way that we should not be experiencing. And it is not acceptable. We should not disagree and be disagreeable to the extent of taking people's lives away. You can have political divisions, you can have divides, but violent actions, murder, is never, never acceptable.
And yet, it happens, and the attacks have happened quite a bit in the last few years. We heard some of them from Carol, the Minnesota legislators. Steve Scalise, Nancy Pelosi's husband, attacked, of course, the attack on President Trump's life twice last year, including that assassination attempt in Butler, Pennsylvania. What is the right way to turn down the temperature in the United States right now?
I think the right way to turn down the temperature is to treat one another as neighbors. Treat one another as people who belong in the same community. America is great because we have origins that span the globe, but we come here because we can achieve great things, and they always happen when we work together. And so I say that to every person with a platform, a title, a place where you can influence others, to today recommit to moving forward with rhetoric that isn't going to inspire action like violence in our communities. We, yes, have things that we don't agree on, paths ideologically, paths based on our belief that might be different than those of other people in our community. I, as a Democrat, do not need to be mad to be angry at a Republican. we can disagree on the substance, but at the end of the day, come back and realize we're in the same mission for the same country and advancing leadership in the world. And that's what I'm going to commit to. And I encourage others to look inwardly and see how they can do that today.
But Congressman Almo, with all due respect, that political discourse, that productive technology conversations, and debates, when you don't agree with someone's thoughts on something, it doesn't seem to happen anymore.
Well, we have to do better. I'm not going to, suggest that we have found the way to resolve our conflicts in the best way. But I'll tell you what isn't and will never be acceptable, and that is violence. And so we have an extra burden today to keep trying, to keep working towards meeting the ideals that I know that we share.
So let me ask you about geopolitics, because you are vice-ranking member of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs. We did have a big story today about Poland seeking a consultation with NATO specifically and NATO powers after shooting down drones that crossed into its territory during Russia's latest massive airstrike on Ukraine. They called the incursion an, quote, act of aggression. What are you hearing from U.S. officials and the White House on this?
Well, look, I go back to the president's summit with Vladimir Putin, his deadlines that weren't met. Vladimir Putin is testing limits. He is testing our resolve and our commitment to NATO and to our European allies. And the way we must respond is by recommitting to Ukraine's fight against Vladimir Putin's aggression that has only become harsher, has been more aggressive against civilians, and is seeking to undermine our strength and our alliances in Europe. And so I need to hear from the White House, and we need to see a commitment to Ukraine in an even stronger way.
What does that commitment look like?
Look, that commitment goes to certainly supporting them militarily and continuing to provide the support they need on that end. But beyond that, when you have rhetoric that is uncertain about our commitments to NATO, that helps to fuel Vladimir Putin's test. And he certainly wants us to have uncertainty in our relationship with Ukraine, our relationship with Europe, and continuing to see an inconsistency from this administration provides some of that continued motivation for Putin to try actions like he did in Poland.
All right, so there are definitely geopolitical concerns with everything that's going on overseas. The other thing we think about a lot is security and independence when it comes to energy. You're a member of the House Committee on Science, Space and Technology, ranking member of the Subcommittee on Environment. Wind power is something that has been singled out several times critically by President Trump. Talk to us about how important offshore wind is to the state of Rhode Island.
It's very important. Offshore wind is incredibly important to Rhode Island. We have a project that received a stop work order, Revolution Wind, that was set to power 350,000 households between Rhode Island and Connecticut. And unfortunately, the stop work order not only imperils our solution to the challenges of climate change, our work to lower energy costs, but it also puts people out of work. Right, you know, we talk about the all of the above strategy. The all of the above strategy has to include wind, and this project was 80% complete. 45 out of 65 turbines in the water, and you're sending people home. That's the president's actions, not creating jobs, taking them away. And so we're continuing to work very aggressively across the aisle with Republican colleagues as well to speak to the wisdom of continuing this project.
Well, let me just ask you something, Congressman. Governors in the U.S. Northeast are considering dropping resistance to natural gas pipelines and other fossil fuel projects in the hopes they can convince the president to allow those offshore wind farms to move forward. Do you agree with that possible trade-off, if that's what needs to be done to save wind farms in your home state?
Well, unfortunately, we've seen this as a seriously troubling turn. However, when the president has been at the negotiation table, this is something he has impressed upon. And I'm committed to wind, but again, if there is going to be an all of the above strategy, it has to include wind, not exclude it. And so I know that the governors are making very tough decisions. I think in the long term, renewables are going to be the path that achieve our cost objectives and our climate objectives. But this has certainly been part of what the president has put forward when he has engaged these governors alongside members of his administration.
Okay, so let's talk about engagement of those governors. You did say working alongside Republicans here, working across the aisle to come to a resolution here. Has the president actually agreed to discuss offshore wind with the governors of those Northeast states, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Massachusetts?
I know that there are conversations ongoing with members of the administration. I don't know of a specific commitment from the president, but the facts are clear. We need wind, and I'm hopeful that the president and his cabinet members see the wisdom in continuing a project like Revolution Wind. It is important to my state of Rhode Island, but it's also a linchpin to growing the industry across the eastern seaboard, including in places like Virginia, including in Connecticut and Massachusetts. So I want to continue to see progress here, and I know those governors are working vigorously to get to the table.
All right, so appreciate your time on this Thursday. Congressman Gabe Amo, Democrat for Rhode Island, joining us there from the nation's capital. All right, folks, we are headed for a break. We've got stocks higher across the board, pretty much hovering near their best levels of the session, pretty broad-based rally. When we come back, we're going to talk wearables and the impact on women's health and more. That's coming up on Bloomberg Businessweek Daily.
It's 2:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. CPI Thursday, a relatively tame inflation reading and signs of a cooling jobs market spurred a rally on Wall Street. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all pushing higher. Could see record closes today. We've got the S&P right now up 52. That is a gain of 0.8%. The Dow up 1.3%. NASDAQ up 0.7%. Russell 2000 index of small cap shares surging by 1.4%. The 10-year 4.01%, with the 2-year 3.53%. Gold down 0.2%, 36.32 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude oil down 2.2%, 62.28 a barrel. And Bitcoin right now up 0.6%, 114,273 on Bitcoin. We're keeping an eye on Paramount Skydance, said to be preparing a bid for rival Warner Brothers Discovery with a mostly cash offer for the entire company. Paramount Skydance up now by 10.6%. Warner Brothers Discovery up 27%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. All right, well, this week, Apple introduced its first new AirPods Pro model in 3 years, adding new health tracking features. The new device will feature a heart rate monitor, allowing the earbuds to work with an iPhone to track a wearer's pulse and measure calories burned during exercise. And Tim, our next guest, knows a lot about the relationship between technology and wearables specifically and how it all plays into the health world.
Let's get to the Business Week Women's Health segment, where we focus on key issues and developing technologies impacting the present and future of women's health around the world. We've got with us Rosalind Picard, Doctor of Science, Grover M. Herman Professor of Health Sciences and Technology at the MIT Media Lab, also Director of Effective Computing Research. She joins us from Cambridge, Massachusetts. Effective computing, what is it?
Hi, it's such a pleasure to be here with you. Effective computing with an A is defined as computing that relates to, arises from, or deliberately influences emotion.
Wait, okay. So wait, walk us through that. So it's in use today, and how is it, what is it enabling us to do?
Lots of things. It's an area started here at the MIT Media Lab decades ago. And initially it was about giving computers the skills of emotional intelligence. Then we started learning that a lot of people could use better understanding about emotion also. Working with many people who had difficulty understanding others' emotions as well as their own, we started building wearable technologies that could monitor physiological changes in our body, even when we were leaving the lab, not just here hooked up to racks of equipment.
Then those physiological changes were documented, obviously for research, but in terms of helping others understand what a person is feeling or experiencing, how does that work?
Yeah, so obviously emotions are very personal and very private. So we don't do any of that sharing of it without people's fully informed prior consent. However, there are a lot of times when people are confused about their own feelings. For example, a person's heart may be racing and they may think that they have a cardiac condition, but in fact, it may be their fear of a cardiac condition that is causing the heart to race. So the wearables let you collect data in the real world. In fact, we built some of the first wearables here in the Media Lab, at least the first ones I know of, that could monitor the cardiac information and the autonomic nervous system information, like your fight or flight response.
So walk us through, because this is, as you said, wearable computers at MIT. You've been working on this for over 2 decades. Walk us through a little bit of kind of where you guys, or how you were thinking about it a couple of decades ago versus kind of where we are today and the progress you've made and how it's evolved in terms of what wearables can do when it comes to really assessing our health.
In the beginning, we were interested in emotions that could help make people's experiences better, say in a learning experience. Is the learner frustrated or bored? Or usability? Is this software driving users crazy? Or is it a great experience? And automobile driving too. Is this situation on the streets stressing out people? Could we change the situation and have lower driver stress? So we started by building wired systems that could leave the lab. And then later we built versions with small wireless sensors that could go on jewelry and in wrists. We built the first wrist watch that could monitor simultaneously signals like electrodermal activity and PPG, the photoplethysmography that's used to extract heart rate today. And also, you mentioned the Apple thing. We built some of the first earbuds that actually worked with an iPhone that measured heart rate with consumer quality data and published that, I believe it was back in 2009.
Well, you know, I love what you are talking about. And I think about, as a woman, as a mother of a daughter, that when it comes to women's health specifically, I feel like there is a lot that's not paid attention to. And obviously there's been studies and research that really bear this out. So I'm curious about how technology or wearables can improve the health and health outcome and knowledge and assessment when it comes to women specifically.
Thanks for asking about that. Women have definitely been left out of a lot of health studies. I learned that it's less than 10 years ago that the National Institute of Health started even requiring scientists to include female mice and rats in their studies. Before, they were sticking with just the males. Amazing. To avoid the complexity of the female system. The opportunities are huge for health with wearables, and especially for women's health. There are so many conditions that are different for women than for men, and they're not only vastly understudied, but the kind of data is very undersampled. It's like asking somebody what they feel or what they experience instead of actually counting the way that the pain each month is affecting their life or the way that the disruptions at night are affecting their sleep. And now we can do those kinds of measurements with wearables.
So what is the right technology, in your view, that people, and specifically women, need to adopt in order to have this better understanding?
Well, I'm not going to be promoting a particular product here today. At the Media Lab, our job is to make possible those future things. We're building the things that are pre-product, that are in some cases decades ahead of what will be out there. Sometimes we're also using commercial systems to gather data. So one example of that is we use a smartwatch that collects autonomic data and movement data, and we're looking at the structure of what is enabling people to sleep better. Sleep is such a huge problem, and it affects women differently than men, and we need to help people fix it.
So let me ask this question in a different way, which is, when you look out at the products that are available with the context of what you've been working on for years at the MIT Media Lab, what has been harnessed and sort of what is still in the pipeline? What is still being researched? Like what percentage of the opportunity that you think is out there has actually been achieved with the products that are on the market right now? Where are we in that timeline?
Oh, probably about 1% of it has been achieved.
Okay.
There's so much more we can do. Yeah, there's a huge amount of stuff happening here that is not out there yet. As you saw, just like even from the pulse rate and earbuds, what did that take? 17 years for Apple to get to their announcement. Actually, other companies did it 10 years ago. So I don't know why they're just doing it now. But there are a lot of new innovations. For example, my colleague Janan Dagdevaran is leading a group here to revolutionize the early detection of breast cancer and make it really comfortable and easy to monitor changes to avoid the kinds of nightmares of detecting cancer changing very fast between screens, or people not going to get a mammogram or get screened because it's uncomfortable or it's expensive. So she has built conformable technology that shapes to the breast and allows people to get clinically significant, great data without the discomfort of, being pancaked.
Unbelievable. And it is really interesting to see maybe how technologies, we talked about kind of the health gap when it comes to men versus women, whether or not technology can really help us and wearables. Fascinating stuff. I hope you'll come back and continue to kind of fill our minds with what's going on, especially when it comes to technology and wearables specifically. Rosalind Picard, she's Doctor of Science, I should say. Grover M. Herman, Professor of Health Sciences and Technology at the MIT Media Lab, Director of Affective Computing Research, joining us from Cambridge on this Thursday.
Really cool stuff. 1%. In terms of what's available.
Which is exciting to think about what's to come, but I also thought it was fascinating what she said about the AirPods and how long this stuff is taking.
Listen, I monitor my sleep and it's not pretty.
I'll take anything that's going to help me make me sleep better. Hey, when we come back, check on trading and also some of the stocks on the move. You are listening and watching Bloomberg Businessweek Daily. Carol Massar, Tim Stenovec. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Businessweek Daily with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
All right, everybody, we're just coming up on an hour to go until we wrap up the trading day on this Thursday. We've got a rally underway. We are up about 0.8% on the S&P 500. Dow Jones Industrial Average, the outperformer, up 1.3%. And you've got the NASDAQ 100 again, Tim, of just about 2/3%. Again, we're staying near our highs of the day.
It's broad-based, too. 430 names higher, 74 declining in the S&P 500. Every sector in the green, Carol, except for energy, down 0.2%.
I'm Carol Massar, along with Tim Stenovec. Let's get to some stocks on the move on this Thursday. With us is Bloomberg News senior reporter and deputy team leader for U.S. equities, Jess Menton. And Jess, we are seeing IPOs and another one today.
It is, and it's really hot on this, especially we're keeping a lot of our reporters busy with Bailey Lipschultz, our key IPO reporter, as well as Georgie McKay on our equities team. So looking at Figure Technology, the ticker is FIGR. So this is the latest tech company to benefit from investors' newfound appetite, like Carol was talking about, for the IPO space. So this company is actually a blockchain lender. And if you're looking at what happened with today's trade, so it actually began trading on the NASDAQ under that ticker, and it opened at $36. While it's pulled back slightly from that, it's currently trading around $31.50. That's still above where it IPO'd at $25. So that actually gives it a figure around raising around 787 million here. And it really joins this growing list of unicorns, which is really important context when we think about the IPO market the last few years. But then looking ahead and what it means here. So this buy now, pay later lending company Klarna actually made its stock debut just yesterday. So it rose nearly 15% from its IPO price. Then you also have other stablecoin providers like Circle earlier this year, as well as design software platform Figma. So you really have a lot of momentum going right now as far as what's going on in that type of space, and particularly in the crypto area as well.
Yeah, Gemini, the Winklevi crypto exchange. Then outside of crypto, even more IPOs on the horizon. BlackRock Coffee, Legence, and then Via, the rideshare app. Expected IPO too.
So we have a busy few weeks this week as well. And then, of course, actually, if you put in context for this week, this is the busiest week for IPOs since ARM in 2023. Wow. So we have StubHub actually coming next week. So that's the ticket resale company.
Unbelievable. But, you've got a market that's hitting records, right?
Right.
So if you want to introduce a new issue, this is probably the market
to do it.
Good
sign for the economy, too.
Yeah. Centene is another one that you're watching, and that's moving.
The ticker is CNC. So this is a health insurer. It was the top performer performer in the S&P 500 earlier today. If you were looking at the MOV function, now it's in the top 3 behind Synopsys and Warner Brothers, but it actually reaffirmed its annual earnings outlook that it actually had already issued in July. So it did reaffirm that. It also gave positive views on Medicare star ratings, and it said it expects cost improvements in its Medicaid business. If you look at some of its peers like Molina Healthcare, MOH is the ticker on that, up 6%. Also, Elevance Health is up 2.6% as well. So you're seeing its peers moving. But I want to put in context, if you look at year to date through yesterday's close for Centene, its stock had dropped nearly 50% this year. So still has a long way to go. If you look on the sell side, the A&R function in the terminal, 5 buys, 15 holds, 1 sell. Barclays strategist Andrew Mock, he actually has an equal weight rating on the stock. He was talking about how that Medicare update was better than feared, with the company seeing medical cost improvement in the second half of the year. So you're seeing some bright spots there, but still really tough year when you're looking at where that year-to-date performance was before today's gains.
Okay, well, not a tough year for Oracle.
No.
This was a big one yesterday.
It was.
And today, maybe giving up some of those gains.
ORCL's the ticker, down a little over 6% right now. So on pace for its worst day since April 4th from earlier this year. So you were just alluding to, Tim, the massive run that we saw in this stock yesterday. So it had really historic rally. It actually was up 36% on Wednesday. So that was its best day since 1992. So the context there, it had reported this stellar cloud demand numbers. And then the Wall Street Journal on top of that yesterday also had reported that Oracle had struck a $300 billion deal with OpenAI. But if you're looking today, actually JP Morgan, the derivatives desk, they actually had been crunching numbers on the retail investor side of things. So you actually saw retail investors selling aggressively into Oracle's rally yesterday after buying those shares on Monday and Tuesday. So you have a bit of a retail story there. And then, of course, if you look beyond that, as well as some of the other peers that were outperforming yesterday too, Broadcom, AVGO is the ticker symbol. That stock's also down more than 2% today. That had been among some of the big gainers yesterday. And then, of course, I have to point out Vistra, VST, is down more than 2% as well. That's tied to the data centers. That had been jumping yesterday, as well as AMD, Advanced Micro Devices. But both of those stocks are also lower on the back of this, after a lot of them had a tremendous run yesterday.
Yeah, some big movers, certainly, in today's session. All right, going to leave it there. Jess, thank you so much. Bloomberg News senior reporter and deputy team leader for U.S. Equities, Jess Menton, here in studio. Be sure to check out our new Stock Movers podcast. They're 5-minute episodes, biggest winners and losers in the trade. You can find it on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere you get your podcasts.
A redhead crossing the Bloomberg terminal. A majority of judges on a Brazil Supreme Court panel found Jair Bolsonaro guilty of attempting a coup after his 2022 election defeat, making him the country's first former president convicted of such a crime. Justice on Thursday became the third member of the 5-judge panel to vote in favor of Bolsonaro's conviction on charges that he sought to stay in power by plotting a military coup that included plans to assassinate President Lula da Silva.
Just another thing we're watching when it comes to the geopolitical. Hey, folks, we are getting ready for the last hour of trading on this Thursday. And as we said, we've got quite a rally underway. If you're watching on TV, the close is coming your way in just a moment. Tim and I continuing, though, on Bloomberg Businessweek Daily, continuing to watch all of kind of the concerns, national security concerns around the world. So we're going to dig into that in the next hour. This is Bloomberg.